From the state capitol, Capital Connection with Senator Bob Huff. And now, Capital Connection.
Hello, I'm Senator Bob Huff, and thank you for joining me on Capital Connection. Today our guest is Bill Leonard, Board of Equalization member from District 2, who served in the legislature for 22 years, then was elected to the Board of Equalization in 2002, re-elected in 2006, and we're pleased to have you here today, Bill.
My pleasure. Good to be here, Senator.
So, now you served in the legislature, you were in the Assembly, I think you were a minority leader for a while as well. And over there, people always wondered what we did. They thought we worked on an assembly line or something, assembling things. So the real question is, what is it you're equalizing on your Board of Equalization?
I went from the Assembly to a job with even a more obscure name. The Board of Equalization was created in the 1870s to equalize property tax assessments between the counties, because there were scandals between county assessors. Thanks to Proposition 13, we no longer do that. Property taxes are fixed at 1%, assessments are fixed at sales price. So the reason for our name no longer exists. We're now the state sales tax collection agency, and we're the state's fee collection agency, and we're the appeals agency for everybody's tax, sales and income tax.
Well, tax is spelled with 3 letters, but most of us think of it as a 4-letter word. And perhaps you can talk about some of those taxes that you administer and what the difference is.
I've tried to change our name to Department of Tax or Revenue so that people who are upset know who to call or contact.
Well,
the Board of Equalization is not the name you think of if you're looking in the telephone book, for us to be more accessible. So I'm moving us online so that taxpayers can get opinion letters and get answers to tax questions. We do all the sales tax in California. We collect it, we administer it, we collect it for the cities and counties. We also do all the billing and appeals on that. If the taxpayer gets audited and has a dispute, they come to us on appeal. We do all the fees, from the ballast waste fee for ships offshore, to the hazardous waste fee, to the fuel taxes, to the timber tax.
Now, this is just the appeal that you get involved
with? No, we collect all those
Okay.
taxes, and we do all the appeals.
Okay.
We also do the property taxes for all the state's 800 or so utilities. So they're assessed by us. We're the county assessor for Edison, Gas Company, all of those folks. Levy the property tax, then it's collected by us and distributed again to the local governments. Then on top of that, we're also the appeals agency for all of those taxes, plus the insurance tax, the bank and corporation tax, and the personal income tax. So each meeting on our docket is filled with one tax to another, jumping all around.
Well, for an obscure agency, you seem to have your hands full with taking care of all these taxes that we collect.
It's very, very busy, and after years in the legislature, I discovered there's a lot of gray areas in the law. I know it doesn't surprise you, but
it shocks me, actually.
Legislators vote on a bill, and they think it's real clear, or they know it's not real clear, either one. It gets over to us, and taxpayers and lawyers and accountants start looking at it and say, what did you mean by this? What is this taxable? What is the tax rate? So that's our job, to answer all of those questions and fill in the gaps.
Now that brings up an interesting point, because we've talked before, and as I recall, California is one of the few states that actually has something like Board of Equalization, isn't it?
We're the only elected tax board in America. Which I think is wonderful, because as an elected official, I appeal to voters like you do. I listen to them. I put on tax seminars. Departments of Revenue in the other states don't feel that obligation.
They're just another bureaucracy.
They're another bureaucratic agency that's accountable to the governor. And I'm told in other agencies where the governor says, I need a little more money this year, the Department of Revenue audits more people. Or if the governor says, be nice to that person, they kind of lay off. We're independent. We don't do that. There's 5 of us on the board, 4 elected from districts. The 5th member is our state controller, elected statewide. We don't answer to the governor. Obviously, we ask for a budget from year to year, but he cannot order us what to do. We respond to the law that the legislature passes and the governor signs, and we respond to our constituents.
Yeah, and responding to the constituency, clearly, the more responsible we are to the people, the more effective we do our job.
But it's a bipartisan board, and I notice that both Republicans and Democrats, they really want to know what their voters are thinking, and they really want to be helpful.
Well, good. I wish the legislature did a little better job of that before we put all those things in, but I'm starting to get into an editorial comment there. Would you tell us a little bit about the difference between sales tax and use tax?
They're the same thing. If you don't pay sales tax, you owe a use tax. We put on in the 1930s a tax that says if you don't, if you use something, you owe a tax on it, no matter what the item is, a personal property item. And I think it started because when we first put on the sales tax, it was obvious, I buy something from you, I owe a sales tax, or you have to collect it and pay it. And people tried to get around that law by saying, we're not selling to each other, I'm renting to him, he's just using it, therefore the tax isn't eligible. And the legislature, about 2 years after the sales tax was adopted in the 30s, adopted the use tax to say, no, you can't play that game. If there's an exchange of property and an exchange of money, that's a taxable transaction.
And how do you make sure it's collected?
Well, that's the tough part. I mean, we audit a lot of businesses, and the big ones we get. I mean, the guys that buy the big printing presses from out of state owe a use tax because their retailer is not a California business. And we audit them, we get them in the big money. Where the real fight is now is, should we audit the homeowner?
Right.
Should we go to the person who shops by catalog or by internet and go knock on their door and demand to see all their checks and see who they paid? I don't think it's worth it. We figure the average family owes about $35 a year in use tax from catalog sales and internet purchases and things. We can't afford to send an auditor out to their door for $35. So I think we ought to change the law, Senator. There ought to be a threshold that you don't owe use tax until you owe more than $5,000 of use tax. That is, you're buying a fire engine, you're buying a printing press, you're buying something really big from out of state. And let's just not try to go after the little guy this way.
Well, in a way, by not defining it to some threshold that's meaningful, we're making criminals out of the common taxpayer, too, that's not declaring all this.
Well, and it adds to this phony tax gap number that I know you've heard in your committee briefings, that there's billions owed. Well, you have 37 million people, they each owe $35 a year. That does add up, but it's not collectible. And I keep arguing to our experts, when you advise the legislature, don't just tell them what's out there on the table. I mean, there's crooks who will never pay you. Tell them what's collectible, that if we did our job right, what we could get as a collection, and what that gap is, it's much, much smaller.
Well, how would, let's say I'm a responsible citizen, I like to think I am, but I'm a responsible citizen, I want to pay these things. How do you even know what's due at the end of the year, or what's the mechanism that I would go and say, hey, you know, you missed this, I owe you this money?
It's not easy, but we're making it easier. On the internet, at our website, which is BOE.ca for California, .gov for government, you can find a use tax form, and you can fill out that form. You have to have how much you paid for the product, then you have to look up where you live to get the right tax rate, because tax rates are different all over California.
We'll talk about that.
Which makes it more difficult. And then you multiply the percentage, and that's the check you write to the Board of Equalization to cover your use tax obligation.
Now, do you get a lot of people that voluntarily go through that?
Near none. Near none.
That doesn't surprise me.
We're in a new controversial program now that the Democrats push to try to collect more of this tax. We're now contacting every doctor and dentist that might have medical equipment in their office, but they're not a retailer. They don't sell things, so they're not registered with us. We're trying to contact every one of them to say, did you pay use tax on that?
Well, that's interesting, because the doctors and attorneys, they don't pay taxes on the services they provide. That's something that we taxpayers haven't quite agreed to yet, and yet they'll buy things that they owe taxes on.
And if they buy it in California, they pay the sales tax and it's done. So this is the challenge they have, is if our auditor goes into their office and they got a very expensive x-ray machine, can they prove that when they bought it, they paid sales tax? They're off the hook. If they can't, then we're going to send them a bill. And that's where I'm arguing. I don't mind doing that as long as it's cost effective.
Right.
You know, if it's an expensive x-ray machine, okay. If we're talking about somebody who bought some books, it's just not worth it.
So then you do